Thanks for coming today to Raising the Security Bar with Guardr. You probably wonder what Guardr is, and we're going to talk about that in the next few minutes here. My name is Mark Shropshire, and I'm the open source security lead at Mediacurrent. And what that means is I get pointed to a lot of client security concerns or questions, kind of monitor the security issues that come out on each Wednesday and other times on Drupal.org as advisories, and try to keep up with all the latest news and security and what's happening with that. It keeps me busy, but I've had a lot of roles over the years, including IT and DevOps, and had a chance to manage at times and done development. So I've had a lot of fun doing all those over the years. Again, I work at Mediacurrent, and we build websites and applications that are enterprise level, and we've got a lot of great Drupal talent at Mediacurrent and do a lot of fun. But we're known for Drupal, but we also have UX and strategy and design and lots of other areas, and security being something that's a focus at this point too. So today, kind of wanted to start out with a little bit of an agenda of what we're covering, and this is mirrored on the program page on the Baltimore site. We're going to cover what is Guardr, you may wonder. Why use Guardr? Like why would you want to use this thing, and what makes it better than just rolling your own distribution or just downloading and installing or using Composer to install for D8. And a little bit of demonstration, and then we'll talk about how to contribute. So I think that would be remiss to not talk about contribution, and I need help. Thank you. So let's talk about what is Guardr. So Guardr is a Drupal distribution, and that is a combination of modules and projects and settings to basically enhance Drupal security. So we'll get into some philosophy on Guardr in just a minute, which I think is real important, so that you kind of have an understanding like what you would get with Guardr and why that's important. But the idea is that this is a baseline that you could start a brand new Drupal site with. You're going to get Drupal core, and you're going to get some hardening tools for security and some additional settings that aren't default in Drupal. And a lot of this is geared towards, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but they're geared towards the security requirements and controls that enterprises fall under. So we'll kind of get into some of those. But there's the project page, so you can check it out, and we'll go from there. There's also we'll talk about that in a minute, but there's a Guardr core module that is a part of the distro that gets pulled in and controls all the settings. So a little bit about the philosophy of Guardr. One of the key philosophy points that we have is the CIA information security triad. So a lot of times I've heard folks talk about security, and they think about maybe malware, they think about viruses, or I need to patch a Drupal module. That's security. Those are components, but there's also confidentiality of information. Are we securing databases and securing content and things like that? Integrity is part of this triad. Is our database schemas consistent? Is the database moving between environments? Is everything going to all the columns and the settings and all that for databases and for other data models going to stay consistent and not lose data for some reason, that kind of thing. So, and then lastly, availability. So probably the biggest availability type related security thing you might hear about in the news and that sort of thing is denial of service attacks. But there's a lot more to availability. Like how about Nginx staying up and running? That's an availability thing. So those are all, to me, in the security umbrella and things that we kind of want to look at for Guardr. So another nice reference, OWASP has a top 10 most critical web application risks. And so these are some of the other items that we like to kind of monitor for Guardr and make sure that make sure that we're looking at all of these types of security issues that can happen. And you'll recognize a lot of these from security advisories, and I encourage you to read those when they come out. It is interesting, and ask questions if you ever have questions about those. It's good to know what, it's good to learn about security through the advisories. Why are we having a security update for a module or core? What's behind it? What was the vulnerability? That's a thing you can dig into. And so some of these show up on those advisories, but there's also some other interesting items here. And so I'll post the slides and get those out there, but OWASP has some references, and you can check out those links and read all about details on what these mean and that sort of thing. But we're going to move on a little bit into how modules are selected for Guardr. So again, Guardr is a distribution, and we'll kind of show how to install Guardr and how to get it running. But a key component is the modules that go into Guardr. And from a security standpoint, we want to make sure that we don't just grab every module that just looks handy for security, or that looks nice, and just include it in something like this. So we want to be real careful about what we include in Guardr, and these are some of the philosophy items around that. So, does the module fulfill a part of the CIA information triad? We talked about this triad, and that is a check we kind of look for. Does it address one of the OWASP top 10 issues? It may not. That's fine, but it's something that you can kind of use that to evaluate. Also, is there previous experience with the module? This kind of gets into who maintains the module and how is it maintained. Is there activity in issue queues? The same kinds of things you would evaluate in. So there's an idea in security of attack surface. So as we include more modules and more libraries and more components into our builds and our projects, every one of those contain lines of code that can then possibly have security issues. So this is why you hear a lot of security folks and others, and maybe lead architects who just like, hey, I know that module's handy, but there's not enough value in it, and we just don't want to include a lot of extra modules and that sort of thing. So we really want to only include modules if it really provides a lot of key value, and not just put it in there for just because it's liked or someone thinks it's okay. And the last one is a little tricky, but we also look at stable release, and this one is important, but it's good to say, is there a stable release? Where's it at? Is there progress towards a stable release? And there's been a lot of discussion about this recently in the community, and I love seeing that. So encourage everyone to work and to help contribute to move modules that are important to the community into stable releases, so that they are covered by the security advisory policy. So what to expect after installation of Guardr? So what's going to happen here? We install Guardr, what happens? So you're going to have a fully working Drupal installation. So that's good, check. All right. The next thing is it's based on the standard Drupal install profile. That's a current decision because it's kind of easy, and that's probably what most people install with Drupal out of the box, unless they write a custom install profile. Although we do tweak a few things along the way there, but and then you're going to have some additional. You're going to have the Guardr modules that are needed to be enabled on install. Those are going to be enabled. Some modules are included in Guardr and they're left disabled, and there's a reason for that. We don't need to turn on every module, but the module may be there for a purpose. Maybe for auditing. Maybe it's something that not every site. We feel like every site doesn't need, but many sites might need, and we want Guardr to kind of recommend those best practices. A good example in the Drupal 7 version of Guardr is two-factor authentication. We really highly recommend using two-factor authentication. How many people use two-factor in some way now? So if you're not familiar with that, that's a method, and it works. You can use that with Google and Apple, and a lot of websites use it now, but it's a way where you log in with your password, and then you're prompted for, you may get a text message with a code, or you may use something like Google Authenticator or Duo, and then you'll get another code there that you'll be asked to put in. It's a one-time code. So that's definitely a recommendation example for that. And I think the most important thing that Guardr offers is the recommended settings that Guardr provides. Now, these settings are based upon a number of security standards, and we'll get into some of that in a second. But the settings mean that we're not just installing every module included in Guardr just default. We're providing settings that are kind of been vetted by security professionals and that sort of thing. And that's a great item that we could really use input on. So if you help with Guardr, we'll talk about that in the contribution. But if you help with Guardr in any way and contribute, love to have some input on the settings that we use and documentation that points back to what recommendations someone might have, like password policies and things like that. So why do we use Guardr? We've kind of covered some of that loosely, but this is kind of the broad one. Security is hard, and that's it's late in the afternoon, but that's a fence that's locked, but you can walk around it. But security is hard. I mean, it's a challenge. We spend a lot of time on it as developers, as system administrators, and all that. It's a continuous challenge. So any tools that we can use in any systems and processes and standards that we can use to make it easier is really key, really important. So while security is hard, and while you can lock down sites and secure them and do those sorts of things, there's also a balancing act along the way here. We're balancing between security and usability, and it makes it very challenging. So there's some organizations that just have to have extreme security controls in place, and that's just the way it is. There could be government regulations, could be financial sector regulations, and that is, there's really that's all they can do. But also, just because even if you have a personal website that you're running on Drupal, or a small business website that maybe has no PCI compliance issues, it could be mostly informational. There's no reason not to think about security on any website. And I've heard people say, and this is important, I've heard people say that, hey, this website, it's just informational, it's brochureware, we don't need security. Well, there's lots of reasons that people could argue that down. And one of them is if you're on a shared host and you don't secure which shared hosting is another challenge. But let's say you're on a shared host, a small website, and you don't update Drupal core, you don't update modules when security releases come out, that Drupal site can become a vector then to not only have someone access into the server, your site, but also to access other sites on the server. So we put each other at risk by not working together. And I think this is kind of interesting, and it kind of usually makes management swallow a little harder when they see numbers like this. But this is, it's not that, I don't want to be up here and scare people, but there are realities. There's costs too when you don't take security seriously. And still things can happen when you do take security seriously, but at least you're prepared and you've got processes to deal with any issues, hopefully, that come up. These are some of the security standards and certifications and controls that Guardr pulls a lot of philosophy and controls from. So you may recognize some of these, and I bet if folks in the room, we probably have higher ed, government, financial sector folks that work in those sectors. You'll notice some of these. You'll recognize some of these. Some of these you may not recognize, but others you will, because you see these come through in tickets and issues and questions. So I want to talk a second here on Drupal 7 Guardr. Drupal 7 Guardr is still supported. It has a stable release. We have folks that are out there that use it and rely on it. It will continue to have support as long as Drupal 7 is supported and through LTS and that roadmap. But it will have limited feature releases, so we want to kind of keep it stable and not make a lot of changes at this point. I welcome issues, and the community that works on it would love to have any contribution that's out there still, but we do want to kind of keep that stable, and we're working harder on the Drupal 8 components now. So we'll kind of jump into more of a Drupal 8 specific mode. Is anybody interested in Drupal 5 Guardr? That woke everybody up. Okay, you guys are paying attention. That's good. We did not have Drupal 5 Guardr, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention Drupal 8 gives you better security out of the box. So even without Guardr, and I argue Guardr improves it even more, Drupal 8 is really nice from a security standpoint. So these are some items that you just get out of the box. You install Drupal 8, and again, I don't want to misconstrue that means that you're secure and you can walk away and everything's fine. Security is more complicated than that, but you get all these things. These are improvements, enhancements from Drupal 7. So I don't want to say that Drupal 8 is not secure. Drupal 8 is secure. It's a fine system. There's always things you need to do, enhance, and to improve, and sometimes you have controls and requirements that you just have to meet. So that's kind of what we're addressing. So Drupal 8 Guardr. So this is really right now for new installs. So you're starting a brand new site, but there's some work being done now on actually including Guardr and settings in existing Drupal 8 installs. I'm real excited about that. We'll see if it works, how well it works. But one of the requests that came up a lot in Drupal 7 Guardr was, how can I add Guardr to an existing Drupal 7 site? So Drupal 8 makes things a lot easier to add, I believe, to add Guardr later on to an existing Drupal 8 site, and I'm really excited about that. And so more will come on that. But we're building on top of Drupal 8's security enhancements. So we've had a development release and up until today, but I'd like to announce that we have Alpha 1 out now. So we say yay for everybody. And thanks for everybody's helped on that along the way. So that is exciting. So we're going to have continued support, new feature releases, and because it's based, install is through Composer. You can use Composer install and update processes as you would following it's pretty much the same instructions on other Drupal projects to handle and work with Guardr. So as far as security features, one of the things that is kind of neat is some recommended core configuration settings, and this is done in the Guardr core module through Config Factory. And so we are basically we move, and we did this in 7, we're logging Watchdog. If Watchdog is used, we move it to keeping 1 million entries. If you keep 1,000 entries, that's the default for Drupal. That can work, but that makes it really hard to audit. It's a shallow log, can be. Obviously, it can get even worse if you have a lot of PHP errors and things like that. So it's good to keep systems. Always check those errors and make sure those logs are clear, because they can make it hard to find problems along the way. So some account settings, we force administrators as the only folks who can register new accounts. We turn off personal contact form for new users. And so for updates, update notifications, we're checking updates for uninstalled modules and themes. I think that's kind of nice. That is part of your attack surface. As you remember, probably I think last year there was an update. There was an update to Coder, if I remember right, that it did not have to be enabled, and that can happen. So those types of situations, just because the modules is in your code base and not enabled, does not necessarily mean there could be a vulnerability down the road that could be used. And so we're also setting email notification threshold as a start to only security updates. This is something that could be changed. All these settings could still be altered afterwards and saved to config. If somebody needs to make changes on top of this, that's fine. But we look at that like if you are doing daily notifications or something like that on your site, and obviously a lot of us handle these reports differently in different environments. But if you're relying on the built-in update process, you may have some releases that are a few behind that are just bug releases, and I really would like to see notifications really focus on security in that, but that can be changed. So some modules that we're using, we're using password policy module, and that allows us to set a standard password requirements for users. And Drupal has some nice built-in features to talk about if passwords are strong or weak and some recommendations, but this makes it where you can comply with security controls in an organization. An organization says, we've decided this is the password policy and this is what it should be. So that's a good one. Login security module allows us to handle brute force attacks and say after 3 attempts, I believe Guardr set to 3 attempts right now in 7, and so after 3 attempts, then that account is blocked. And that's a recommendation because that's a requirement by a lot of the security controls that we've reviewed. It might turn out that that's a bit, a bit much for your instance, and you can change that to something else. But I think keeping an eye on brute force attacking is good. Drupal also has some built-in help with brute force attacking also. In addition, this just sits on top of that. So mass password reset, this is an example of a module that we don't enable, but there can be times when a site you need to reset all the passwords on a site at one time, and there's been some recent reasons to do that, and there's been reasons in the past to do it. So that's what this module does. It's there. It's a recommended Guardr module for that. You enable it. I highly recommend. This is one of those things you enable in a testing environment. You test it, make sure it works, because it is going to reset everybody's password. Session management. This is an important item. So we're using automated logout. So Guardr recommends a 15-minute logout, and a lot of people will go, oh no, that's too much. I want users to stay logged in, for 2 weeks or a week. That's okay if you're not under security controls that dictate it, but there are requirements. A lot of organizations absolutely have to have logouts, forced logouts after that time. So again, those are settings that can be changed. Guardr, though, sets these up for you. Session limit allows us to limit the number of sessions so that you can't be logged into the Drupal site from multiple instances using the same account. We really don't want people to share accounts. I think all of us understand that, but it's convenient sometimes. Users like to share it. You just use my account and you can log in, from home or whatever. And this helps eliminate that and some other issues. This is the Security Kit module is a module that provides kind of a number of items that help with enhancing clickjacking and some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And it also content security policy. It has some controls for that, which is a little more intense on setup. We don't in Guardr dictate those settings because that's very particular to a website setup, but we like to have Security Kit offered so that that's available. As far as system monitoring, auditing, logging, those types of things, we're using login history module, and that lets us track every login that happens with IP address, date and time, that kind of thing. And I would say there's a number of this is a great point of contribution. Anybody that wants to help the community, in the 7 version of Guardr, I have a lot of logging modules that do logging of all kinds of things, and many of those are not updated to Drupal 8 yet. So if you would want to help with something, and some of them are fair, this would be great entry points for folks who want to contribute. Logging important things like when roles change and things like that. That can be really, really useful. So love to have help. We're including the security review module. It's disabled, but this is a way to run a report and see is the site configured properly, that sort of thing. And again, it's disabled because a lot of us have environments where we have other tools to do this type of check. Additional features, the diff module. The diff module is handy for a number of reasons, including checking diffs of content, things like that. And then redirect 403 to user login. This allows us, if let's say automated logout times you out, logs you out, but your URL is still set to a path a route that has to be logged in, has to be authenticated. when you try to access it, it's going to redirect to the login page, letting you log in, and it take you back to that original route. And username enumeration prevention. This module is one to prevent, and I'm trying to explain this, and it may not prevent all the cases because there's lots of places this can happen, but the goal is to work towards preventing places where a user who shouldn't be able to find lists of all the usernames on a site, access to those. So there was a famous hack years ago where someone went to a system telecommunications company, and they basically enumerated all the users and were able to gain access and figure out logins and who was using a system just for the fact that they had all those usernames. So that's so this is one where you really don't want people being able to list users and take that data. That's some information disclosure that we don't want to have. So as far as demonstration, Guardr, we build Guardr with Composer. So we download it, we run Composer install. If you are including Guardr in another, which you can include Guardr in another build right now. If you're starting from scratch, you just require Guardr with Composer. But it's pretty simple. We just run Composer install and do that. So I had to have I wasn't going to run Composer in here live. And I imagine folks can figure out why. So here's a screenshot. It works. You can try it. So here's an easy way to install Guardr. If you want to check it out, install Guardr and try it. You can clone the project. You can change directory into Guardr, run Composer install, and then you can run Drush Quick Drupal. I still call it Quick Drupal. I think it may be called something else now, but it's still aliased. And this is a great way, by the way. Quick Drupal is a fantastic way to quickly test and run Drupal and try some things out. On an instance, and you don't have to have a full environment running. So kind of a tour side here of things. So I mentioned how great Quick Drupal was, but I've got a Drupal VM set up, and I'm going to install Guardr with Drupal VM that I have set up. So, and this is my setting for that. And do not make your username admin. Do not make your username your password admin. That is, for example, here, and is a poor example at that. So I just want to point that out. This does not mean you should do that. As a matter of fact, that's an important thing while we let this load here. A lot of times, you shouldn't even include the word admin or administrator in your main UID1 account. Make it something completely different, something arbitrary that's hard to guess. Real important. I think we're just about done here, and see if we can load it up. Not quite yet. There we go. So you notice it looks like Drupal 8. Yay! So a couple of things here. If we go to reports, if we go to available updates. We'll see some things here. And that was not loading. I'm going to actually kick off to our module list anyway. I want to hit this first. So if we scroll down through our modules, you'll notice that we have some Guardr modules. Here's Guardr Core. This is what drives the config for Guardr, that recommended settings that we talked about. But here are some of the security modules. Some are enabled, some are not. So that's in there. You'll see that. And so here's reports. So under reports, we have login history. There's an example, kind of what login history gives us. And also under available updates, you'll notice that it's, I'm not getting back out, I guess, to the internets. So it's not getting the data, but it's checking all installed modules. And there's the uninstalled. And under settings here, we can see that we're only getting security updates and the check for that. So there's some examples of the configuration. But it's not real exciting, is it? But the nice thing is you still have your base. You're still going to build from this world anyway. but you know that you have a lot of security settings on top of what's already there to make it even better. And so those are some of the components. And I want to mention the roadmap here. So it looks like I'm trying to connect. Let's see if we can hop on another connection here. So as far as roadmap items, we are going to continue to work through the Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 crosswalk plan, which is documented on the site, on the project page. And that's kind of showing us all the projects in 7 and what we plan to do for 8. We're going to evaluate more core config and see where we can harden those settings better. Really want to add the ability to add Guardr to existing 8 installs, and really need a lot of documentation help. So another way to contribute right there to the project. And while we're talking about contribution, how do we contribute? First of all, I really want to thank all the organizations, Classic Graphics and Mediacurrent and all the others who have contributed. A lot of individuals over the years. You guys are amazing and all that. And it's awesome to see people, it feels good to see people pop in, folks you don't even know, and you meet through the project. And that's a lot of fun. So I encourage people to contribute to Drupal just because of that. It's still such a neat thing to see. And I did want to thank the Drupal security team, everything they do, because that helps us an awful lot. We learn an awful lot. This is something, by the way, I'll be careful here, I'm not naming names, many other open source projects do not have anything like this. This is a big deal. So people ask, why would we use Drupal? Say this, especially to enterprise folks. That is a huge deal. So how can you help? We've talked about most of this, writing documentation, supporting Guardr users. There's people that have questions and need help, testing patches and updates, developing new features, and as far as how to get involved. So we've got the issue queue, there's our documentation node. It still needs to be migrated to the new documentation system, so any help there would be awesome. And we're on Drupal Guardr on IRC. We've also got in Drupal Slack, we've got a Slack channel for Guardr, so I'm hanging out there too, so feel free to jump in there. And follow us on Twitter, where we post some security-related info and updates. And I definitely want to open it up for questions. That's what I have. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Thank you. Did you have a question? Okay. Sure. Who's ready to install Guardr? Benji.
So if it's mostly a collection of modules and some configuration, what's holding up a full release for Drupal 8? Or is it more than that?
Can you repeat that? If it's more than just the...
Is it more than just a collection of other contributed modules and some additional configuration? Is it more than that? Or if it is just that, what's holding up a full release for Drupal 8?
So, good question. And I think the one thing to mention is that I think the settings are the important aspect of Guardr. And that is exactly what it is. You nailed it. The settings are the real key piece, because we could all just take those list of modules. Somebody could have posted that on blog posts and just start including them. That's been done. Lots of these blog posts are out there, but the settings are what's important. What's actually holding up any further release at this point is I would like to get a feature, not Drupal feature. A feature for the project. I would like to include to allow you to add this to an existing Drupal 8 install. So before we hit further, following kind of release management here, I want to, and before we would get to betas and release candidate, I really don't want to be adding some major feature like that. And I think that will be the last major piece that we want to have before we release a stable release, and that'll get us there. But I think that's real important, because so many people have asked for that. How do I add it to a project? And what's more important than that, not just add all this stuff to an existing project, because here's what's going to happen. A new project with Guardr, what's going to happen, in my opinion, we'll see what happens when people submit into the issue queue, but I think what's going to happen is if we just said, oh, you can add it now to an existing project, and if it tried to add config and do things to an existing site, it might cause problems. And so what we want to do is have a way so that you can go into Guardr Core and just check off the components you want to actually use. So be real specific, because maybe password policy is all they need. We want the Guardr password policy. We want auto logout, some session management, but we don't want maybe we don't want those core settings changed. Maybe we don't want some other things. I want to set it up so that only certain components can be checked off and added.
So I'm thinking that I might install something like this on an existing site and then do a config export and do a git diff and review what's changed in my configuration directory. But you want something that's a little more user-friendly than that. Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. I want to follow kind of Drupal's philosophy. We all love command line, probably in this room, being more maybe security developers. I don't know who's represented here, but I still like Drupal's philosophy of allowing some easy UI config still available, and that feels like a core Drupal philosophy over the years. Good question. Anyone else?
Are you working at all with like Acquia or Pantheon? You know, because when you install from Pantheon, they've added some of their own customization as well to core.
Yeah, and you were asking about the Pantheon changes that they make to the drops branch, for instance, and how that works. Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really looked into that at this point, and I don't think anybody else on the team has, but it's definitely something that would be worth considering. That might be another reason why we would want to be able to add to an existing site in that case. I see that being more of a thing to look at with the Pantheon side, and maybe with Acquia we wouldn't need to really worry with it. Any changes, it could use Guardr as is, but you could maybe follow this add-on idea with Pantheon. You would have to do all the drops release changes they make in the core and additions, and then you could. That's why I really kind of want to get this other bit in there, because then you could just apply that selective additions, and I think it'll work. I mean, yeah, it's not there yet, but good question. I want to take notes on that. Yes.
So this is wonderful. So I'm so impressed. My question is like, is there any part of the Guard core module that we can use like with the existing Drupal installation right now, like just using the modules?
That's a fantastic question. I really wish I put that in the presentation. I will add it for next time, but I'll answer you now because you asked, and it's awesome. That's something that's been asked before, and so Guardr, I kind of feel like can be an academic thing too. So, and I think it's great. Open source, that's what it's about, right? We like to dive into the code, look at the code, how is it done? So there's absolutely no problem if you go look at Guardr Core for the settings, go look at Guardr, the distro, and you can. That's what I've had to recommend to Drupal 7 users who want to add Guardr things to Drupal 7 sites that exist. All I can offer right now is to say, you can go and install the modules, and then you can look at the config and then manually config those settings. We looked a long time at using features, but then we knew that they would get overridden, and so we never really finished a solution for it. But again, Drupal 8, just for example, putting the modules, installing modules back in the web root modules is great. That actually helps this project a lot, where those modules live. So, good question. Anyone else? Good question. This is and for 2:15, 3:15 in the afternoon, amazing.
Have you looked at adding any encryption modules?
Yeah. So on the roadmap, we do have some encryption modules listed as something that's on the crosswalk plan. So I think we had some. I think there may be 1 in 7. I'm not positive. But it's something I would definitely consider. I'd love some input though. I get really concerned when we talk about anything encryption and signing off and saying this is okay. Because I start to worry that then people start to use that, and if I'm really concerned when I see people who try to write their own cryptography. So I'm not that smart at math to do that, and lots of smart people are at math that do cryptography. So I'd love to hear input on folks who do know and say this module is a good one to use for inclusion in that. I know there's been a few of them, so that would be great, I think. And it's something that, frankly, enterprise clients ask for. They need to encrypt, and encryption at rest on databases. That's a big issue also, and that gets into infrastructure. And another contribution point that would be fantastic is that I'd like to see is some documentation for Guardr that says here are some additional recommendations that can help with infrastructure recommendations and some maybe guide points, and also where it works out, I really want to put non-Guardr recommendations, but Guardr recommendations that can be that the community agrees on, quote unquote agrees on. At least people don't argue about it too much. But if we can get some of that going, I'd love to see any of the general security things that come out of Guardr actually get more. Not in the Guardr documentation, but actually posted in the main security docs on Drupal, because I think there's more visibility. People are going to find that quicker than the other, so that's awesome.
I'll add one quick thought, just more a comment than a question about if you're looking at how to evaluate encryption modules. If you see any sign that the module author implemented the math, don't use the module.
So you said implemented math?
You were commenting about it's hard to evaluate the math in encryption, and I agree.
I got you.
As
Okay.
a non-cryptologist, much of that math is outside my skill set. Anytime I see sign of the algorithm being in the module, I'm done. Because the chances they got it right are so slim versus if they're using an underlying library
Yes.
out of PHP itself or some other more reliable source so for me, that's the end of evaluating the module. AES is actually in here. We're done. This is not a good module to use.
We're done, except is AES implemented correctly?
Well, that's my
Is it the
point,
right-
is
yeah.
no. If it's in the module,
Yeah.
my assumption is no, it is not.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I find it, then I'm done. It doesn't
Gotcha.
mean it is done correctly, but it means it is almost certainly done wrong.
Yeah.
He's done with it. His evaluation's over.
Yeah, it's over. That's a good point. That's really valid. So any other questions? These are some great questions. I really appreciate that, because this gives me great ideas to kick off on next rounds of work and issues. And my screensaver finally kicked on, so that may be the answer to that. Well, I appreciate everybody coming today, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions up here. Thank you.
And I know Kat, who used to work for me, was actually taking on. Did we get along? He said, yeah, we get along. Awesome. The very new Drupal, and used to do a bunch of Drupal. Don't do as much Drupal. Everybody would be interested in perhaps helping with something.
That's great. Yeah, fantastic.
I would need a lot of, here's how you fucking do things in Drupal help initially, but I learned pretty fast.
Yeah.
And it's more the figuring out time and where it can be useful.
So the fun thing about this project is this is not heavy-duty coding, but this is for distribution. So it's a little bit of DevOps, learning Composer, and some of the coding has to do more with the configuration and getting the settings locked in. It's not as near as heavy-duty as I'm working on views and rules modules and things like that that are super intense.
So, but I'll reach out to you.
That's awesome. Yes, fire an email or something. That would be awesome.
Okay.
Really appreciate it. Or hit the issue queue, and you know, if you've got an idea immediately, just throw it in the issue queue.
No ideas. I just know that from all the places where it's like where can I plug in a little bit more?
I mean,
It's like,
another huge help even on documentation is just verify that the instructions that I give, like on that one slide, even work, that they are what I say they are, or that they make sense. Somebody that's coming to Drupal new, we make assumptions if we've done Drupal for a long time, like, well, you know, you just forget some of those things. So, but that's awesome.
okay, I'll reach out.
Cool.
to you.
Thank you so much.
First of all, upgrading the documentation to the new system, it's automatic, it takes a few minutes.
Oh, good.
And then you wait until someone with appropriate authority checks it.
It's that easy. So I haven't been holding off on this.
But once you do that, it's restricted